Hello and welcome to another video in the Alekhine exchange variation. So in the previous chapters we've basically covered everything except for one little line, and this line was extremely confusing for me because there were small differences here as well that could lead to big exploits for white. So yeah, we have one annoying little move to still consider, which is the move rook c1 at this point. So compared to other lines, white has not played h3, white has not played knight f3, and white did play, white has not played bishop e2, but white did play knight f3. So in short, this is the knight f3 and rook c1 line, which is freaking confusing because there once again are slight differences here that could mean a big deal. All right, many of the themes are exactly the same, so we're just gonna test your thematic knowledge at this point. Yeah, and actually there's also a really cool line which I want to show. So knight c6, as usual, the right move. And now, well, in the previous chapter, we've checked the move d5. And now, the small difference here is actually that knight a5, in this case, is not good. Because white is in time to protect the knight. So now after b3, our knight is badly placed on a5, and white has a huge advantage, actually. So, when the rook is on c1, we actually need to play knight e5 now. Because, otherwise our knight will be trapped on a5. Good news is, white hasn't played bishop e2 yet, which means that white's castling and white's d-file advance, d-file domination, isn't as dominant here. So after knight takes, bishop d4. If you compare it to the previous line, with the bishop on e2 and the rook, and not the rook on c1, after bishop f4 is an extra move, by the way, but just for comparison, after taking, queen takes, white has no rook on white has indeed no rook on d1, but castling is not possible anymore. And after e5, d takes, bishop takes. I still think white is better, but it takes some time now to castle and to put a rook on. So that's one of the differences here. But the move that actually I want to recommend here is bishop f4, which is a cool extra possibility for us now, since there's a rook on c1. So white probably needs to play rook c2, otherwise the rook needs to move back, which is a bit awkward. And now we play the move e5. We still want to break in the center. D takes, the white goes back, and then we take, and now there's a little trick in the position. Take a second to pause the video if you like and find it. All right. The trick in this position is knight takes c4, because if white takes the knight, then we have queen h4 winning back the bishop, and therefore we win a pawn. So white needs to take on e6 here, and after taking b3, we once again have the break in the center, d5, because white is still in the center with the king. So now we once again have good compensation for the fact that after c5, knight d7, we have an isolated pawn in the center. But white is so underdeveloped that we are in time to create counterplay. For example, as indicated with the arrows, let me show them to you. Knight b8, knight c6, targeting the d4 square, or knight e5, knight c6, targeting the d4 square. And white will be in trouble to, get that square under control, which is very important always in isolated pawns. What they say usually in isolated pawns is that the pawn itself is not weak, but it's the square in front of it. And if you can target that square or even control it, then you're usually fine as black. And since we also have a dark squared bishop, then imagine that we can take the dark squared bishop from white off the board. Then we actually have a good chance to control the d4 square, which gives us, a lot of potential, I would say. Okay, so that's the d5 move. So definitely a line to keep in mind, actually. And there also one of the reasons why I wanted to include an extra chapter on this knight f3 and rook c1. Since even though they're small and all the lines look the same, these neat little differences are actually kind of annoying if you don't know them. It's easy to fall for a trap like that. So yeah, I am happy that the move trainer exists and that you can actually train these differences. So yeah. So after knight c6, we've covered d5. So after d5 in this position, we play knight e5. If white's rook was on a1 and the bishop on e2, then the knight actually goes to a5. Right? Okay. So bishop e2, d5. This should transpose to the previous chapter, and h3 should transpose to chapter 1.5, and now we need to take a look at the move b3. So once again, white's trying to be prophylactic, and but this time with rook c1 and knight f3. Yeah. All right, so what do we do here? You probably will guess what we will do, which is d5. And this is actually only played once, according to my database. Yet, in many positions, this works. And after c5, you might think, but Roland, c4 square is under control, and if we play knight d7, there's no rook on a1 anymore. So what are we going to do? Good question. Hey, we don't move the knight. We play bishop g4. Yeah, I love this move. It's really in the spirit of this opening. We just don't care about the knight on b6, and instead we're just going to target the white's d4 pawn. So what happens here? What if white takes the piece? Well, we play e5 as usual. We're going to target the e4 pawn, and white is actually in deep trouble once again. Yeah. White can already go wrong quite harshly here. For example, if white plays bishop b2, tries to act like it's just a nosebleed, then after bishop e takes d4, we win already back the piece. And after knight takes, d takes, f takes, a takes, I think black was slightly better in an internet game in 2021, actually. Yeah, I think that was actually the only game played in this position with the bishop g4 idea now that I think about it. But yeah, black has the more safe king. The rook is already active on a1. White hasn't castled yet. It is an opposite colored bishop position, but we also have the slightly better pawn structure, so black is a bit better. Yeah. Bishop e2. Knight e2 is probably the best move here. If d takes e5, we win back the piece with d4, since the knight is pinned. And more or less the main idea behind the previous move, e5. And bishop b5 is a novelty here. I thoroughly looked for alternatives for white to challenge our piece sacrifice. And now we will take. G takes. Queen takes is not great because after e takes d4, we simply win the piece back. And that's not the case after g takes, because after e takes d4, white can play bishop takes c6, with the point that if we take back, white can still take back on d4 since the queen is still on d1. So after bishop takes c6. The best move is actually not to take back the light squared bishop, but to take the dark squared bishop. D takes e3. And it's a hugely messy position, but we have extremely good compensation since the white king will probably never castle again, and we will get a lot of pawns and initiative in return. For example, if bishop takes b7, that's actually already a mistake here, because here we can play queen h4, threatening mate in 1. And notice how white cannot castle because of bishop e5. And white will actually already be mated in a couple of moves. So the best move for white here is actually rook f1. Other moves are available too, but rook f1 seems the best. And after e takes, rook takes, bishop d4, we already win back the exchange with an ongoing initiative. So white can, for example, play rook c, c2, takes, queen e7, and actually we already win back the piece with a winning position here. That's beautiful. Yeah, bishop takes b7 is way too greedy because of all these tricks that we have in the position. So bishop takes b7. Are we good? Yeah, bishop takes b7, queen h4. And actually, white will lose material. Other moves are possible too. We could still have a look at queen e2, for example. But I think it's also kind of fun to figure that out yourself, right? So, but take my word, it's white should be losing here, or very close to it at least. So, if white cannot take on b7, where should he take? Well, he should take on d5. That's the safer option. And now queen h4. Yeah, the computer evaluation is similar here, but one of the biggest reasons I think white d5 pawn needs to be taken off the board is because white now has a safety net by putting a bishop on e4 at some point, or a knight on e4 covering the e-file. That's my guess at least, but also I have to say this is all computer analysis. This is not me with 4 hours on my chessboard figure things out. This is with a computer. So bishop takes d5. The best move I could come up with is queen takes b6. But like I said, queen h4 definitely is worth taking a look as well. And a takes b6 is actually also quite decent. Activating a rook, also creating some threats. And the computer gives evaluations similar for all three options. So yeah, but I like to move queen takes because we are threatening to take on f2 and we are putting a rook on the d file next. And I thought that the lines were most clear after this. So after queen takes b6, probably the best move for white is short castle. The king needs to go to safety. And now we play rook a d8. And if you've paid attention, what are pins? Pins are awesome. Indeed, very good. Because pins are super annoying for your opponent. And it's something that I say to all my students. If you have a pin, make sure that you keep it. And if you have a pin and your opponent tries to chase you away, try to keep the pin so that your opponent will be annoyed for a long time. Yeah. And in this case, the pin is actually kind of really detrimental, I think is the word, for this position, because I think white cannot keep the piece because the pin and activity that we have is too severe for white. For example, f takes, it doesn't work because after queen takes we have a double attack on the c3 knight and the king. Knight e4 is a move that I considered, and here e2 already wins back the piece because after queen takes e2, yep, we win back the piece. So white is actually clever by playing bishop takes f7, taking the pawn first. And after rook takes, queen takes e2, yes, we are a pawn down, but that pawn is a nice target for us, so we can start targeting it. And even if white gets to an ending with a pawn extra, it's this pawn which is not too substantial. So we're totally fine here. So, bishop g4. I love this move, and bishop b5 is a hard move to make because it seems, yeah, there's a lot going on here. So, but I do think this is one of the, yeah, a move to consider for white if white has this position on the board and a lot of time to think. So, let's take a look now at knight e2. What happens after knight e2? Well, we take on f3, g takes f3, and now e takes d4. And white has no good way to take back. The best move, I think, is bishop f4. Knight takes d4 already loses, because now we can take with the knight in this case. Yeah, bishop takes, queen e7, bishop e2, and now queen b4. Double attacking the bishop on d4 and the king on e1. We win back the piece with a dominant position. Yeah, this was actually an online chess game as well. So, what happens if bishop takes d4? White does not lose the piece with this one, but after knight takes, queen takes b6, white still is in a lot of trouble. White needs to play knight e2 back. White's development is still a long way to go. And now I like to move bishop h6, which creates threats connected to queen b4 at the moment. So our initiative continues and white has a lot of threats to deal with, for sure. So, in my opinion, the best move is bishop f4. And now I really like to move queen f6. And once again, this is all computer analysis, but what I like is that the knight cannot move still, and we have a pin. Look at this. Ha. Pawn on f3 is undefended, so white still needs to take care of that. Yeah, so white plays bishop g2 most likely. We play rook f8. And probably the best move for white is rook takes c6 in this case. I'll show you in a second why. Because if white plays short castle, then we can take on e8. Queen takes e2, not on e8. Words, okay. Queen takes f4, and I think black is once again on top, even though we have an exchange down. We have two pawns and huge threats connected to the king side, and we might, well, actually we don't have two pawns that we need to take here first. These pawns could march over the board as well, potentially. So, yeah, the better move is rook takes c6, and here after b takes, white can play b7 and win back the rook. Yeah, so it's actually kind of a clever combination for white. But after rook a b8, we do win back at least a piece. And now after rook takes, which was a mistake apparently. Yeah, this is a mistake because after short castle, white's problems are more or less over, and we only have two pawns for the piece. So this is not enough. So the best move here, yeah, it's an amazing line. I love it. Is d3. Yep. And if white is not careful and plays a move like bishop takes a7, this is not in the files, but I'm doing this from on the top of my head. I think the move that is killing white at this point is queen c3 check. Yeah, because if king f1, d takes e2, double attack, queen takes c2. Looks like white is fine because after rook takes we have b8 queen. But now we have actually mate in 2 of the queen c1. So white needs to let the piece go on b8 and take the pawn on d3 with queen takes d3. And now after queen a1 check, king d2. This is simply the main line that I have here. If queen d1, then we win and mate in 2 with bishop c3. King d2, only move. Queen takes a2, we win an extra pawn. That's why the d3 move was so good. King d1, queen a1. And here, if white plays king d2, we actually have a perpetual, which I think we actually need to take with queen a2. And yeah, a spectacular perpetual, but white needs to get here as well. So kudos to that player who gets here successfully. White can continue with knight c1, But that is very dangerous in my opinion, because after rook takes b8, finally taking the piece back, let's say rook e1, bishop b2, queen c2, rook takes b7, our initiative still continues. We have such a much easier play because of the opposite colored bishops and our safe king in comparison to white's unsafe king. So white's threats are far from over. And as indicated with the arrows, we still have got ideas with threats here. So yeah, this is a very long, complicated line, mostly computer analysis, to which, of course, I took a human perspective of. But of all the things, I think that it's important to know the slight differences between rook c1 with h3, with bishop e2, and with knight f3, and in this case the move the knight f3 idea. Yeah, I think that's it. If I'm not mistaken, after d5, white can still transpose to other lines with bishop e2. Then we transpose to previous chapters. So yeah, the bishop g4 line is simply wonderful. But yeah, it's also kind of silly because after bishop b2, if white doesn't take the knight, then after knight c8, short castle, we actually transpose to the previous chapter. A bit of a buzzkill, but yeah, it is a really funny move order actually, now that I think about it. Yeah. All right. That's this chapter, this crazy chapter, but personally for me, meticulous one, in the sense that this does conclude all the move orders that white can make in combination with rook c1. So with h3, with bishop e2, without h3, but with bishop e2 and knight f3, and so on. It's complicated, but if you get a grasp of those small differences, if you train them and remember them, then yeah, you can make fantastic moves like bishop g4 here. And then say like, oh, it's just a move order thing, nothing special. You're sacrificing a full piece, but it's just a move order thing, you know. After short castle, after bishop b2 and short castle, we just transpose. Yeah. Yeah, chess is wonderfully weird sometimes, but okay. That's it for this chapter. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.